Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos al seminario web titulado Update on New Therapies for Patients with Phenylketonuria, dictado por el Dr. Harvey Levy. Esta instancia ha sido organizada por el Laboratorio de Enfermedades Metabólicas del Instituto de Nutrición y Tecnología de los Alimentos de la Universidad de Chile. Los invitamos a realizar sus preguntas mediante la opción Preguntas y Respuestas de la plataforma Zoom o a través del Facebook de EducaINTA. Esta instancia estará moderada por la profesora Verónica Cornejo, profesor titular de la Universidad de Chile y jefa del Laboratorio de Genética y Enfermedades Metabólicas del INTA, y por el doctor Juan Francisco Cabello, neuropediatra y director del Centro de Diagnóstico CEDINTA. Doctor Cabello, le doy el pase para que inicie nuestro primer seminario web.
Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon. We welcome you to this web seminar. It is an honor for us to have such a distinguished audience with more than 300 inscripted people from all over Latin America and other countries in the world. Our intention in organizing these seminars is to try to contribute in the midst of this contingency, in the midst of a situation that poses challenge to global health and also to medical education. The possibility of reducing transportation and organization costs opens a new stage where there are no longer excuses to depend on the support of the pharmaceutical industry to meet and share knowledge. For this first webinar, we wanted to start in the best possible way, inviting a legend of metabolic disease. He has some of those characteristics that only great people have, an enormous knowledge comparable only with his generosity. Dr. Harvey Levy obtained his MD degree from the Medical College of Georgia, following residencies in pediatrics and pediatric pathology at Boston City Hospital, Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York, and Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. He served a fellowship in metabolism under Dr. Mary Efron and Hugo Moser at Mass General. When the New England Newborn Screening Program was established, Dr. Levy became the chief of biochemical genetics. In 1978, Dr. Levy moved to Boston Children's Hospital as director of the metabolic program, where he expanded the program from a PKU clinic to inborn heroes of metabolism, and at the same time directed the New England Maternal PKU program. Dr. Levy has served as chair of the work group on newborn screening and follow-up and chair of the Newborn Screening Translational Research Network for the American College of Medical Genetics. Dr. Levy has published over 450 peer-reviewed articles on metabolic disorders and has received a number of national and international awards and honors for research in newborn screening and biochemical genetics. Today, Dr. Levy directs a clinical research group that is studying the effect of innovative therapies for phenylketonuria. But most important that all the degrees and CV of Harvey, Harvey is a very good friend, not just from our group, but for all over Latin America. So we are very honored to have you here, Harvey. So thank you for coming, and please, we are very anxious to enjoy your presentation.
Thank you very much, Francisco, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to address you and to talk about PKU. I'm going to be talking about what I call an old dog and new tricks for him. Now, the old dog, of course, is PKU, and PKU really is an old dog. It was discovered back 86 years ago, and it was the first metabolic disorder for which intellectual deficiency was associated. There had been other metabolic disorders, as we know. Sir Archibald Garrett, back in the early 1900s, described Phenylketonuria and other kinds of disorders, but they were not associated with intellectual deficiency. But here, in 1934, Dr. Fulling established that there was this metabolic disorder, PKU, that actually caused very severe intellectual problems. So it's no dog. 20 years later, after its discovery, it was the first metabolic disorder for which there was effective treatment. And it still is probably the only metabolic disorder for which there is truly truly effective treatment, with very few other exceptions. So it truly is an old dog, but it's a very active old dog, still as active as ever. As a matter of fact, in many ways, even more active than ever. And so there are new tricks about dietary and other kinds of therapies, which are being examined now, perhaps more so than in many, many years. And I'm going to talk about those. Well, you can't talk about PKU without going back to the origin of PKU. And this is what PKU looked like for many, many years, before newborn screening and before early treatment. Very profound intellectual disability in the untreated phenylketonuria. And it was originally identified on the basis of urine testing, not blood testing. A urine specimen was obtained, ferric chloride was dropped into the urine on either side of a normal urine. And as you see in this slide, a very deep blue, but really deep green reaction. It looks blue in this slide, but a deep green reaction would occur almost immediately upon the addition of ferric chloride reagent, which was indicative of a phenylalanine metabolite called phenylpyruvic acid that was excreted in large quantities by individuals who were not on treatment for PKU. And the clinical phenotype was quite well identified a number of years after the discovery of PKU. There was intellectual disability. Intellectual disability can be profound, as you saw in the original slide, or it can be not quite so profound. There is a variation in the intellectual disability of individuals with PKU, even in the untreated state, though most of them have decided intellectual disability. Autism. Actually, the first mention of autism was in patients with PKU many years ago. Hyperactivity can be extremely severe. One of the more distinct features of PKU in those who are not treated early with PKU is their extreme hyperactivity. Seizures, very often there are minor motor seizures in people with untreated PKU. They can be grand mal seizures as well. And eczema, which is a feature of children with untreated PKU. The metabolic defect, as many of you know, is a defect in the conversion of phenylalanine to tyrosine. And the defect is in the enzyme which mediates this conversion, phenylalanine hydroxylase. And so there is a profound defect in that enzyme which prevents the conversion of phenylalanine to tyrosine, and therefore you have a high phenylalanine level, a very low tyrosine level, and metabolites that occur. Phenylpyruvic acid, which is the metabolite I showed you before, which results in the positive urine reaction. 80% of phenylalanine in our body must be metabolized, and that's the real problem in PKU. About 20% is incorporated into new protein, but 80% has to be converted to tyrosine. And if you've got PKU and you can't make that conversion, then your phenylalanine level goes up dramatically. And people with PKU in the untreated state can have 20, 30, even 40 times the normal concentration of phenylalanine. Phenylalanine crosses the blood-brain barrier quite readily. The KM, the kinetic crossing for the blood-brain barrier of phenylalanine is stronger than practically any other amino acid. So it readily gets into the brain. And when phenylalanine gets into the brain, it is neurotoxic. It produces the problems that I've told you about. Why it produces the problems, no one knows. For all of these years that PKU has been known, there is still no absolutely unequivocally known reason for the damage in the brain that is produced by phenylalanine. What is the mechanism by which this damage is produced? There are many, many theories as to the mechanism, none of which have been unequivocally proven. Phenylalanine is an essential amino acid. In other words, we don't synthesize phenylalanine. All of the phenylalanine in our body comes from the outside. And that's a key point, because it means that therefore one can devise a diet which controls the amount of phenylalanine that comes into the body. And if the phenylalanine that comes to the body is controlled, then one can control the blood amino acid, the blood phenylalanine level in people with PKU. Very shortly after the diet was discovered came newborn screening. This is a bacterial plate showing one of the original screens for PKU. It was the Guthrie plate. It's a plate which responds to elevations of phenylalanine, so that if you have a blood spot taken from a newborn with a large amount of phenylalanine, one gets a large amount of bacterial growth in the plate around the specimen, which indicates that there is a high level of phenylalanine. The baby probably has PKU. These are normal discs from normal specimens, from normal babies. This is a control disc to make sure the plate runs is adequate. And so consequently, this is newborn screening. This is how the diet can be given early on. Today, newborn screening is really performed more often in newborn screening laboratories by a technology called tandem mass spectrometry, which measures in a very quantitative measure the amount of phenylalanine and other amino acids in the blood of a newborn baby. And in PKU, one sees the very high level of phenylalanine and the low level of tyrosine, which of course indicates that there is this defect between the conversion of phenylalanine to tyrosine, presenting the abnormalities that one sees in PKU. When the newborn is identified with PKU, dietary treatment is given. The diet for PKU consists of two parts, as we know. The first part, and the most important part, is low protein foods. But the problem is that the second very important part must also be incorporated within the diet, and that is the phenyl-free amino acid mixture, because the very, very low protein foods that are allowed in the diet are so low in protein that the other amino acids are deficient. And so if one only gives a low protein diet to patients with PKU, then the diet will be inadequate nutritionally. And so consequently, the formula or the phenylalanine-free amino acid must be also a very, very important part of the treatment, so that one gets adequate amounts of other amino acids, obviously not phenylalanine, but other amino acids, which supplement the diet, the low protein diet, and therefore allow for a total diet which is nutritionally adequate. And this is, of course, the dietary treatment that we know so well for PKU. And it works. And it has been known to work even before newborn screening. And so consequently, here is a picture of a family in which there is an older brother who was not treated early, as compared to his sister, who was born just after newborn screening, was treated with diet from the very beginning of her life. And here you can see the vast difference between the brother and the sister. The problem with the diet, of course, as many of us know, is that it's an extremely difficult diet. People with PKU cannot have what many, many people consider to be the good foods. You can't have a hamburger, cheeseburger with bacon, too much protein. You can't have a banana split, far too much protein in the ice cream of the banana split. One cannot have chocolate cake, far too much protein in the ingredients of a chocolate cake. And of course, one cannot have pizza, far too much protein in the cheese and other ingredients of the pizza. What people with PKU can have in terms of their general natural diet is salad, fruits, French fries, but that's about it in terms of natural food. In addition to that, people with PKU have to have the formula, the medical food, that very important phenylalanine-free amino acid mixture that I mentioned before, which supplements the diet and provides the adequate amounts of other nutritional qualities, such as other amino acids and other nutrients, to make a conditioned diet which is adequate nutritionally. Medical foods don't taste very good. These formulas have an unpleasant taste. People with PKU have to ingest them 3 times a day, so they're constantly under the influence of a medical food and always constantly having to take them. And so it's an extremely unpleasant part of the diet for those with PKU. Low protein foods have been developed, special foods that substitute in a sense, and that will be a little like some of the regular foods. Here is a low protein so-called hamburger, which is a mushroom burger, low protein pasta, low protein pizza, low protein other kinds of foods that mimic the natural foods, but they only mimic the natural foods. They really don't replace the natural foods. They don't taste like the natural foods. They have a different taste and a less pleasant taste. They cost a lot of money. They must be prepared in many cases. The texture of the foods may be different. They may be inconvenient. So there are many characteristics of these low protein foods which really prevent them from being complete substitute for the natural foods. And people with PKU recognize that immediately. So the diet for PKU is extremely difficult. There no meat is allowed, no chicken is allowed, no fish, no pizza, no cake, no ice cream, no anything with adequate amounts of protein are allowed. What is allowed are the fruits that I mentioned, the salad, certain vegetables, although they have even the vegetables have to be measured in quantity, or else they'll become too much protein for individuals with PKU. And of course, they have to have that amino acid, phenylalanine-free amino acid mixture called the formula, which is the people with PKU constantly have to take. So the diet is extremely difficult. It's totally abnormal. And people with PKU recognize that immediately as they grow. They recognize that they're eating far different foods from their friends, far different foods from their parents, far different foods from their siblings. The social aspects of participating in food throughout the day, the social aspects of being able to fully participate in any area where people get together, such as, for instance, in a birthday party or any kind of party or any kind of group session, means that they have to be different, and they feel different, and they know that they're different, and this, I think, is a very major problem with diet for PKU, as well as, for that matter, in individuals who have to be on a very strict diet for any metabolic disorder. So being on a very strict diet of this particular type does represent a major problem in PKU. And so consequently, because it was recognized as a major problem in many families in which there was PKU, the diet was unilaterally terminated by some of these families. Here is a case report in 1962 of 3 cases in which the diet was terminated when the children were 4 years of age. And they were evaluated 2 to 6 months later, and there was no change in IQ. And so Dr. Horner and others in their group decided, well, that's fine. If there's no change in IQ, then they can very adequately and very safely discontinue the diet when a child with PKU is 4 years of age. And there were other case reports suggesting that maybe after 5 or 6 years, one could discontinue the diet because, again, with short follow-up, the case reports said that there were no difficulties after diet was discontinued in these individuals. And there was a theoretical reason given for safely discontinuing the diet at 5 or 6 years of age. And that theoretical argument was that high phenylalanine inhibits myelin synthesis. And as a matter of fact, neuropathologic studies of individuals with PKU showed that there was hypomyelination. And myelin was grossly deficient in the brains of these individuals. And many people reasoned that because myelin was insufficient in these individuals, that was the reason that they were intellectually deficient. And this was the reason for the other manifestations of brain damage in these individuals. And so consequently, it was found by Dr. Yarkolev, a very famous neuropathologist in Boston at the Massachusetts General Hospital. When he studied myelin synthesis, he reasoned that, as a matter of fact, myelin synthesis stops at about 5 or 6 years of age. And if high phenylalanine inhibits myelin synthesis, and that's the reason for the brain damage in PKU, and that, as a matter of fact, if myelin synthesis is no longer important after 5 or 6 years of age, then why continue the diet after that period of time? And so many, many clinics, at least in the United States, and clinics throughout the world, as a matter of fact, were in the process of discontinuing the diet in children at 4, 5, and 6 years of age. However, in 1977, a very important article was published from Poland, the Polish study of IQ loss upon diet termination. And in the Polish group led by Dr. Sobalska, Barbara Sobalska, the PKU groups were divided into two. First of all, there was the PKU group in which diet was terminated at 4.5 years of age. And then there was another PKU group in which diet was terminated even earlier, at 2.5 years of age. And in the group that was terminated from diet at 4 years of age, after 4 years of diet termination, one can see a very decided IQ drop. And as a matter of fact, in the group in which diet was terminated at 2.5 years of age, after 4 years, there was an even greater degree of IQ loss. And so this became a very important and a very famous study indicating unequivocally that it was not safe to discontinue the diet in the childhood years, and that, as a matter of fact, IQ would absolutely be lost over those years. And remember, the earlier studies that showed that it was safe to discontinue the diet were based upon follow-up that was only a few months. But here we had follow-up in 4 years. And here it was shown unequivocally that if you follow for a long enough period of time, you're definitely going to see an IQ loss in children who are discontinued from diet during early childhood years. And so out of this study came the concept of diet for life. That is, that you could never discontinue the diet. You always had to be on the diet. Well, this is a problem, because if within the first years of life, when a child is home, they're under the care of the parent. They can be very adequately controlled with their diet. The parents will not allow the child to have any foods that are not allowed within the diet. And so one can see that the blood level of phenylalanine is maintained in a very safe range. But when the child begins to get out of the home and go to school, begins to recognize that other people are eating foods that he or she is not allowed to have, then there becomes a little change in the child. And the child begins to think about, well, maybe I can have this food and maybe I can have that food. And so the child begins to eat more and more of the foods that are not allowed in the diet. And so consequently, the blood level begins to go up. Between 5 and 10, we see that there is this increase. And then as the child becomes an adolescent and begins to go out with friends and wants to go to birthday parties and wants to to socially gather with other adolescents, there is an even greater tendency to cheat, in a sense, on the diet and eat more and more high protein foods. And of course, concomitantly, if one has PKU, the blood phenylalanine level is going to go up even higher and higher. And so there's what I call blood phenylalanine creep as one gets older, even in individuals who supposedly are on diet, but really are not strictly on diet as they were when they were younger. And we see this as translating into neurocognitive and psychiatric problems in adults with PKU. And this is a very common, unfortunately, a very common feature of even dietary treated PKU. We see deficits in executive function in adults with PKU. There's poor planning. In other words, they can't plan their day the way they should. There are memory lapses, poor organization. And so this translates into difficulty in school. And it also translates into difficulty in their work life. It translates into difficulty in their social life, in their married life, in their family life. Psychiatric difficulties can even produce greater problems in individuals with PKU as they get older. Depression, lack of temper control, phobias, and many other difficulties that are constantly seen throughout the world in many adults with PKU, despite early dietary treatment. And so consequently, because of the recognition of these problems and the recognition that the diet is so difficult and so unnatural, there's a great deal of interest in treatments for PKU that go beyond the diet. I call them new tricks. There are three treatments that have come into play. Number one is cofactor therapy. Number two is an enzyme substitution therapy. And number three is gene therapy. And we're going to talk about each one of those individually. First of all, there's cofactor therapy. And I think most of you probably are aware of the cofactor therapy. It's the cofactor that has the proprietary name Kuvan. This is a therapy in which large amounts of BH4 substitute, sapropterin or Kuvan, which is a synthetic form of BH4, are given to people, particularly people who have some residual enzyme activity in their PKU. In other words, they don't have complete inactivity of phenylalanine hydroxylase. They have some residual activity remaining. They're given large amounts of this synthetic cofactor, Kuvan, and the idea is that the very large amounts of the cofactor, giving them a concentration of cofactor at the enzyme site, which is many, many times greater than the natural concentration of BH4, is going to stimulate an enzyme with some amount of residual activity and therefore allow for some degree of phenylalanine conversion to tyrosine, thereby reducing the blood phenylalanine level as well as increasing the dietary tolerance of phenylalanine. And there have been a number of studies over the world. Here's a European study of the effects of Kuvan on different forms of PKU. There is the effect on the mild form of PKU, mild hyperphenylalaninemia. These are individuals whose natural blood elevation of phenylalanine is less than individuals who have mild or classical PKU. But they have an elevation of phenylalanine. Many of them are on diet because even though they have a milder level of phenylalanine elevation, the phenylalanine is too high for safety. These individuals have a significant degree of residual phenylalanine hydroxylase activity, and at least 75, maybe even close to 100% in some studies respond to the supplemental Kuvan BH4 substitute therapy with a reduction in blood phenylalanine and an increase in their tolerance for dietary phenylalanine, and therefore a reduction in the stringency of their diet. Those with an intermediate form of PKU called mild PKU, in which there is a little less residual activity of phenylalanine hydroxylase, respond to supplemental Kuvan to the extent of about 50%. And so about half of individuals with mild PKU will respond with an increase in their dietary tolerance of phenylalanine when they're given Kuvan. But individuals with the most severe form of PKU, classical PKU, rarely increase their tolerance for phenylalanine or reduce their phenylalanine level, blood phenylalanine level. And the reason for that is because they have virtually no residual phenylalanine hydroxylase activity. As I mentioned, you have to have a little bit of residual activity for the supplemental BH4 to work. So the limitations of cofactor therapy, Kuvan, are, first of all, it does not usually work with classical severe PKU. And these are the people who most need to have some alleviation of their diet, because these are the people who are on the most severe dietary restriction. And these are the individuals with PKU who will suffer the most severe consequences of not sticking with their diet and not maintaining a safe blood phenylalanine level. And unfortunately, Kuvan doesn't work for them. Number two, it does not always work with milder PKU. And I mentioned in the previous slide that about 44 or maybe 50%, about half of the people who have mild PKU respond, but about half of the people with mild PKU do not respond. So no matter how much Kuvan you give these individuals, they're not going to have an increase in the amount of allowed phenylalanine in their diet. In other words, they're not going to have a reduction in the stringency of their diet, and they're not going to have a reduction in their blood phenylalanine level. And it rarely replaces the diet. It's not a substitute for diet. You still need to give diet to almost everybody who even those who respond to Kuvan. We have about 80 patients or so in our clinic who are receiving Kuvan today. And of those 80 patients, I think we only have 2 or 3 in whom Kuvan therapy actually substitutes for the diet. These are individuals who, when they're given Kuvan, can be on a totally normal diet and eat all of the foods that anybody else would eat in their diet. But the other 77 out of 80 patients still need to be on diet, despite the fact that they're getting Kuvan. Maybe their diet is a little less stringent than before, but they still need to be on diet and they still need to take formula. And so, because Kuvan is really not a substitute for the diet, people have for years sought a true substitute for the diet. And along came an enzyme called phenylalanine ammonia lyase, PAL or PAL. Now, PAL is a plant enzyme. It was discovered as an intermediate enzyme in the formation of lignin of plants. You know, trees stand up because of lignin. Lignin is a scaffolding around the cellulose of plants, both around trees, around the cellulose of shrubs, that allow them to stand. If it wasn't for the scaffolding around the cellulose, then they would collapse. Trees would collapse. So they have to have something to hold them up. And what holds them up is a compound called lignin. And lignin is formed from precursors, among which are phenylalanine. And an intermediate enzyme that allows for the phenylalanine to eventually be incorporated within lignin is phenylalanine ammonia lyase, or PAL. So it was discovered as a plant enzyme, and it is now known as naturally a plant enzyme. It's also found in algae, it's found in fungi, and it's found in bacteria. But it's a non-mammalian enzyme. It's a non-human enzyme. So it's a foreign body to individuals with to humans. But it works under certain conditions. PAL, or phenylalanine ammonia lyase, will convert phenylalanine, not through tyrosine, and that's of course blocked in PKU, but it converts phenylalanine to tranexamic acid and ammonia. In other words, it metabolizes phenylalanine in another direction, and it thereby reduces phenylalanine when it cannot be adequately metabolized to tyrosine in PKU, and is very effective in that particular regard. And so it's become a now approved drug in the United States and in Europe as a substitute therapy for PKU. Here is some data from the phase 3 trial, the so-called definitive trial of pegvaliase, which it was called, or PAL, that allowed for the drug to be approved in the United States. There were 257 subjects with PKU in that trial, all of whom had classical PKU. Their blood phenylalanine levels were reduced by 35%, but you can see the standard deviation is very high. And so there was a wide variation in the amount of blood phenylalanine reduction, down to individuals who, for instance, would reduce their blood phenylalanine to below normal. If the normal blood phenylalanine level is 60 or 70 micromoles per liter, they would have levels that would be 20 micromoles per liter in some cases. That was a concern during the study, whether or not hypophenylalanemia, too low levels in PKU, was damaging in and of itself. It turns out that it probably is not damaging, but it is a very effective reducer of phenylalanine. However, it's a non-human enzyme, so it's immunogenic, and it has some adverse effects. The two most common adverse effects of pegvaliase are arthralgia, joint pains. At least 62% of individuals early on, when they receive this enzyme, will have rather significant pains in their leg, in their knees, in their elbows, and their shoulders. Also, a rash is quite common in individuals with PAL. However, in the study, it was also shown that over a period of time, in individuals who did respond with a lowered phenylalanine level, the ADHD was markedly improved. So their inattention symptoms were reduced. And it was on the basis of this efficacy of clinical symptoms, as well as on the efficacy of the biochemical, that allowed this enzyme to be approved in the United States and I believe in Europe as well. So the advantages of enzyme substitution therapy with pegvaliase are that this phenylalanine can be reduced, sometimes to absolute normal. And in those individuals, normal diet can be assumed. In other words, the diet can either be markedly liberalized or can actually be totally normalized. So individuals who do respond to pegvaliase, in many cases, can eat an entirely normal diet. They can eat the hamburger, and they can eat the ice cream and the cake and all of the other kinds of good foods that people with PKU are not allowed to eat. The disadvantages, however, of enzyme replacement, of enzyme substitution therapy with pegvaliase and PKU are significant. First of all, people on this therapy have to inject themselves subcutaneously every single day. The joints and the rash that I mentioned before, the side effects can be quite difficult. You have to have needles that have to be disposed of and have to be cared for. You have to have refrigeration because the enzyme will go bad if it's not refrigerated consistently. And there's an induction and titration phase when one is starting peg-valiase. And of course, the induction titration phase is necessary because it is a non-human enzyme and because it is immunogenic. So people have to develop a tolerance, just like in any allergic or allergenic situation, have to develop a tolerance for the enzyme. And that means that they have to be induced with small amounts of the enzyme over a period of time, gradually titrating up to a maintenance. And long-term safety has not yet been identified because I don't think we haven't really used peg-valiase long enough to know whether or not it is going to be safe in the long period over many years, or will not be safe and we'll begin to see some problems associated with it. So there are some questions that remain, but on the other hand, peg-valiase has been a very valuable substitute. And in this case, it really is a substitute for the diet for PKU. Here are some data from the Children's Hospital published by Dr. Sakharov, Dr. Stephanie Sakharov, who leads the PAL clinic at Children's Hospital now, showing the effects of peg-valiase in a patient population. These are 26 adults who were on diet for phenylketonuria and were given peg-valiase therapy. Those who don't respond, and these are the ones who don't respond, and there are a few, maybe 20% of individuals who are given peg-valiase really never respond with a reduction in their blood phenylalanine level. And so their blood phenylalanine remains. But those who do respond, about 80% of those who are given peg-valiase over a period of time will respond with a blood phenylalanine level that drops down into a very safe range, and in some cases actually drops down into a normal or subnormal range of phenylalanine. And this is with a normal diet. So we're not talking about people who remain on diet. We're talking in this case in terms of people who respond to people who will be able to assume an entirely normal diet. There are the side effects that I mentioned previously, but the side effects, as you can see from B here, you can see that the side effects begin to go away as the peg-valiase continues. So by the end of 6, 9 months, 10 months, and then by the end of a year of taking peg-valiase, the side effects disappear. So no longer do we see joint pain, no longer do we see rash in most individuals who continue peg-valiase. So it's been a very valuable non-dietary treatment for PKU. The third trick that we're giving the old dog is gene therapy. Now, this is still in the experimental stage, but we know that, as you know, gene therapy is now being considered for many, many different metabolic disorders and for non-metabolic disorders for that matter. What is gene therapy? Gene therapy is simply introducing the normal gene into somebody who has a genetic problem. So that in addition to having the abnormal gene, which doesn't work, you introduce into the nucleus of the cell a normal gene, which will then encode the protein that is lacking in this case in PKU, the protein being phenylalanine hydroxylase, the enzyme, and therefore supply the body with the amount of genetic material and consequently the amount of protein that is necessary, in this case the amount of enzyme necessary to adequately metabolize phenylalanine to tyrosine. How does gene therapy work? Well, you can't get DNA directly into a cell. It doesn't cross the cell membrane, and it certainly is not going to get into the nucleus. So how do you get the gene into a body? Well, you put the gene into a virus, because we know that viruses infect cells. And so consequently, the gene is put into a virus that has been modified, so it's no longer infectious to the cell, but it does cross the cell barrier, just doesn't produce disease in the individual. So the gene is encapsulated within the virus. In this case, it's the AAV, adeno-associated virus, which has been modified, so it's no longer infectious in the individual. It's injected into the gene, the virus with the containing the normal phenyldroxylase gene is injected into the individual, and that it crosses the cell membrane. The virus crosses the cell membrane containing the gene, and that at the nuclear membrane, the virus releases the DNA, the normal phenylalanine hydroxylase gene, into the cell, and the normal phenylalanine hydroxylase gene then proceeds to encode the phenylalanine hydroxylase enzyme, which then is adequate to metabolize phenylalanine to tyrosine. This would be the ultimate treatment for PKU, because in a sense it would be a cure for PKU. There are now at least 2 studies and a third that's being proposed in the United States that is looking at gene therapy for PKU in individuals to determine whether or not it works, and whether or not, if it does work, whether or not it's working adequately and sufficiently to actually cure PKU, and will it work adequately for a long enough period of time so that perhaps for the duration of a person's life, all they'll need is this injection of gene, and they'll no longer have PKU. That's the dream of gene therapy for PKU as well as other diseases. As I said, studies are still going on, and we'll see how well it works. So basically, these are the new tricks that the old dog has been taught. And we are hoping that he learns those tricks well, and that maybe one of these days the therapy for PKU will be much more readily done and performed in people with PKU, and that we will eventually be able to look back on this and say, okay, we remember the days when PKU was being adequately treated with diet, but diet was difficult, and maybe we'll be saying those are the old days, and now we're into the new tricks. So I will stop here and thank you, and entertain any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levy, for your excellent presentation. It was an honor for us. Doctor Cabello, le doy pase ahora para que continuemos con las preguntas.
Okay. So Harvey, thank you very much. I think I cannot say that I'm surprised, because your talks are always very inspiring and well, excellent talk. So we have around 10 minutes for questions and answers. So we will have to choose some of the questions that the people are asking to you. Anyway, we can send you the rest of the question, and maybe you can answer later on. But let's see some of those. Well, there are some people asking about, of course, about new therapies. There is one about the use of PAL. They are asking if the patients are able to completely free the diet, or they have to maintain some restriction. And regarding the same PAL treatment, they are asking regarding which are the formal indications to start with PAL treatment on patients.
The vast majority of patients that we have in the clinic who do respond to PAL have been able to go to a normal diet. There are a few who still have to maintain a certain degree of dietary restriction, but for the most part, they can discontinue their formula and they're able to eat all of the foods, the normal foods that anyone else has been able to eat, and still maintain a blood phenylalanine level that's within the safe range, or as I said, even below the safe range in some cases, below the normal range. So it's been really very effective in those people who do respond.
And Harvey, regarding the age, which age will you indicate PAL in your center?
Well, the drug has been approved for those who are 18 years and older, so that in the United States, under the restriction of the label, one is not allowed to give treatment to anyone who is below the age of 18. I believe in Europe it's 16 is the lower age, but I'm sure from the experience that we've had with PAL, one could give it at a lower age. And as a matter of fact, I would not be surprised if in the very near future there will be some studies in individuals who are in their younger adolescent years and individuals who are even in their childhood years to determine whether PAL is safe for those individuals and whether it works as adequately and as a substitute for diet in those individuals as for those who are older. But at the moment, it's only approved for those 18 years of age or older in the United States.
Okay, thank you. So some people are asking about the PAL adverse events that you mentioned. There is some way to predict which patient will experience those adverse reactions regarding genotype or regarding what kind of severity of the PKU, and if they present those adverse effects, could you start again after on, or will you discard the use of PAL if the patient present adverse effects?
Well, the majority of patients will have initially some degree of problems with PAL. It would be very unusual for an individual not to ever have any joint pains or rash or other side effects from PAL. In the studies that we did initially, we only had 1 or 2 patients, I believe, in the 27 that we had in our center for the trial, the initial trial upon which the approval of PAL was based. We only had 1 or 2 patients who had absolutely no adverse reactions whatsoever. On the other hand, as I pointed out, as one continues to get PAL, the reactions become less and less, so that over a period of time, in our experience, just about everybody will cease having their side effects after continuously being on PAL. We can't predict, though, who is going to have adverse effects and who is not. And one of the questions that has been raised is whether or not it's an antibody effect, whether or not those with higher levels, for instance, of antibodies will not only have less effect from PAL, but will also have a greater degree and a more severe response with side effects. It hasn't panned out that you cannot, on the basis of antibody levels, either IgM or IgA levels, predict, or IgG levels, predict who is going to have side effects and who is not. It's a matter only of trial and error.
Okay, thank you. So, Harvey, let me bring you to the reality of Latin America. You know that some countries have, some others still do not have newborn screening for PKU. Actually, there is a paper from Dr. Borrach in Argentina in 2007 who mentioned that less than 50% of newborns in Latin America are offered for something, for some newborn screening. Of course, in almost 15 years, we advanced, but not possibly not still, to the optimus. In some countries, the formula is covered. In others, the formula is not covered because economical reasons. So do you think that each condition, each country should be considered separately if offer or not these new therapies, high-cost therapies to the PKU patients? Do you think that all our patients should be offered new therapies? Maybe should we do clinical studies in our population before deciding? But what do you think about cost effectiveness and the different realities of different countries in our continent?
Well, those are questions, Francisco, which obviously you're going to have to debate among yourselves. Ideally, you would want to have something like enzyme substitution therapy with PAL available for everybody with PKU, particularly everybody with classical PKU, who are on the most severe dietary restriction. But of course, this is only a dream in many places. So it really is going to be something that is going to be for the future in many different countries, and I understand that. But as things go along, as perhaps other mechanisms for substitution of diet will become available, maybe another kind of enzyme, or maybe the continued use of PAL, then it may very well be that there'll greater acceptance, so the price of PAL may go down, and consequently, it'll be of more availability to patients with PKU throughout the world. That would be my hope. Whether or not that's going to happen, I don't know. But if it does happen, it's certainly going to be many years away. But one would ideally hope that at some future date, PAL therapy and other kinds of therapies that might be truly effective in preventing the problems of PKU and in perhaps substituting for the more difficult ways of treating PKU will become available to everybody with PKU.
So Harry, we are just going down till the end of this very intensive and interesting hour. So talking about future and about dreams, you have been on stage for more than, I don't know how many years, for so long. So is this the future you dream of for the PKU? And what do you expect for the coming years regarding PKU?
Well, I would hope that for PKU as well as for many other metabolic disorders, eventually we'll have definitive therapy. What is the definitive therapy for a genetic disease? It's obviously for giving the gene. It would either be for substituting a good gene for a bad gene, or it would actually be adding a good gene to the body. That would allow for the total eradication of that disease as a disease. And I think many people are hoping that gene therapy will be that answer. Whether it will be and whether it will be for all diseases, but let's just hope that at some future date, gene therapy will be perfected, and that maybe indeed many of these diseases will be totally cured.
Okay, thank you very much, Harvey. It's already 5 o'clock, so the idea is to use not more than 1 hour of your precious time. So thank you very much one more time, and well, I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone.
Okay, so Maria Jesus will close this session. Thank you, Harvey.
Thanks.
Bueno, les agradecemos su participación y en el caso que su pregunta no haya sido contestada, puede escribirnos al email leminta.chile@gmail.com. Para el cierre de nuestro primer seminario web, invitamos a la profesora Verónica Cornejo, quien se dirigirá a ustedes.
First, I want to thank Dr. Levy for the excellent conference and very, very great discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Harry. Lo que yo quiero decirles, agradecerle primero que nada a todos la asistencia a esta nuestra primera conferencia web. Y vamos a estar repitiendo estas conferencias una vez al mes, o la próxima es el 15 de julio. Así que quedan todos invitados, les va a llegar invitación con el tema y el expositor que corresponde. Y además los invitamos a ver y revisar la página web del INTA, donde hay algunos cursos que se realizan relacionados con enfermedades metabólicas. Así que muchas gracias a todos por la asistencia y esperamos verlos prontamente. Hasta luego.